Hello, this is my lab report for Lab 5, Choose Your Own Adventure. This lab focuses on the fundamentals of inelastic collisions. In particular, the purpose of this lab is to understand principles of an inelastic collision and model changes in momentum and kinetic energy in an inelastic collision. The fundamental principles in this lab are the momentum and energy principles. This lab will be entirely computational, as the inelastic collision will be modeled. The system will consist of two masses moving towards each other at a constant velocity until they collide, meaning there's no forces acting on the system, hence nothing in the surroundings. The expected results of an inelastic collision are that the change in kinetic energy of the system is not zero, as energy is transferred in the collision, but momentum is conserved throughout the collision. This is the most important code in the computational model. To begin, I define both objects' mass and velocity before the collision. It doesn't matter what values are input here, as the model accurately predicts the collision accordingly. Next, the initial total momentum and total kinetic energy were calculated before the collision to be used later to calculate the changes in each. Lastly, the program loop updated both objects' momentum and velocity once they collided, along with the kinetic energy being recalculated. Then delta P and delta K were calculated to find the changes in both before and after the collision. These are the results of the computational model. As the two balls approach each other, they collide, and the results of the collision are shown here. This particular collision ended up being a maximally inelastic collision, as both balls stuck together upon collision. But this model can also show non-maximally inelastic collisions. The two most important graphs on this page are at the bottom. Importantly, the total momentum of the system is conserved, while the final kinetic energy is less than the initial kinetic energy. To reiterate, the total momentum is conserved, but the change in kinetic energy is not zero, signifying an inelastic collision. Because there isn't any real data to compare this to, the main comparison in this experiment is that all realistic collisions are inelastic and result in the loss of kinetic energy in some form. So this computational model is accurate. So where does this kinetic energy go, lost by an inelastic collision go? The basis of an inelastic collision requires delta K to not be zero. So the kinetic energy lost by the colliding objects typically goes into deforming the objects involved in the collision. That energy can also be used to add heat or other forms of energy to the surroundings, leading to loss of energy from the system. What if the modeled collision was elastic rather than inelastic? In that case, the change in kinetic energy would be zero, so the colliding objects would conserve their individual momentums in the collision and simply bounce off each other. However, inelastic or not, the total momentum of the system in a collision is still conserved. Lastly, an elastic collision is impossible to achieve physically. It can only be done in theory or computationally. In sum, this lab explored inelastic collisions through a computational model. Fundamentals of an inelastic collision include the change in kinetic energy being non-zero, while the total momentum is always conserved. These can be derived from the momentum and energy principles. In terms of the kinetic energy lost in an inelastic collision, that energy can be transferred to other forms of energy in the surroundings, or it can be used to deform the objects in the system. Thank you very much for watching this lab report.